We are happy you found your way to our introductory course to human rights, and it's great you are joining us on our journey for the promotion of all human rights for all. You don't need any prior knowledge of human rights to take this course. We aim to provide you with an understanding of the key concepts and to empower you to promote human rights. Throughout this course, you will gain the knowledge and skills you need in order to take action for human rights, to promote and claim them for yourself and others. You will understand what they are, their key principles, and the key actors, including your own role in defending or raising awareness. You're going to listen to some activists and real situations and provide you with tips, including to assess your personal risk. You will be asked to do some activities, either by writing or by recording your response in an audio file that you can keep to yourself. When you listen to this sound, it means that a new section is starting, while this sound indicates a question. We will give you some seconds to reflect on questions, so don't worry if you notice some silence after each question. This course is made up of 3 sections, each approximately 24 minutes, and at the end of each, you will find a final quiz which will help you reflect on the key takeaways. The course begins with the basics and becomes more in-depth and increases in difficulty as the course progresses. The first section is about what human rights are and how you can promote them. In the second section, you will learn ways of speaking up for them and the role of institutions. The third section focuses on challenges and risks when dealing with human rights. At the end of the course, you will come away with an increased awareness of the human rights that you hold and ways to defend them. What inspires you to stand up for human rights? Let's hear from Maria Munir, an award-winning LGBTI activist, Guadalupe Morego, head of the Global Human Rights Defenders Program at Amnesty International, and Salil Shetty, a long-term activist and Amnesty Secretary General from 2010 to 2018.
I think there's no one inspiration that really comes to mind. I think for me, it's empowering to be part of a community of human rights defenders. I think no one can really work in isolation. And for me, especially when, I'm feeling down or feeling like I need a jolt in the right direction, it's really inspiring to be able to see what other people have achieved. Whether it's in my own field or not, I like to feel part of a community because I think we're stronger that way. But obviously, my friends see a brighter future for me, and I think that's really important. I think when you're doing human rights work, it can be very pessimistic because you're fighting against a lot of forces and a lot of institutions and power structures which are really hard to unpack. So I think it's important to be in a positive environment. I think a lot of people would be surprised to hear that I don't find myself inspiring at all because I'm just an ordinary person doing things that to some feel extraordinary, but I think everyone can have an impact in their own small way, and for me it just happens to be in a public atmosphere.
I tell you what inspires me: victims of human rights violations, victims of injustice, and their relatives or their loved ones fighting to get a remedy for that injustice. And I've met so many of those people, mainly Latin America, but also around the world, who, after having suffered a grave human rights violation, they are really knocking from door to door in parliament with lawyers, with local human rights defenders, to fight for their son or their daughter to be released from prison because they've been falsely charged, or to have, medical attention because they've been tortured and get the perpetrator put in jail. Those are the people that actually inspire me.
In my case, I think I really had no option but to stand up for human rights, because I was growing up in India at a time when we had a political emergency declared by the then Prime Minister, Mrs. Gandhi. And it's the only time in India's history when the civil and political rights were suspended in the country. So, and people were arrested, in mass numbers. The press was muzzled. Civil society was crushed. So I grew up at a moment like that. So, and a lot of my friends, people I knew, were under attack from the regime. So I think I had really no choice, and so I've never looked back since.
Welcome to the first activity for this course. Throughout this course, you will have the opportunity to engage in personal reflection about how human rights relate to you and how you can stand up for them. Now, take a pen and paper to start some activities, or you could even record your response in an audio file that you can keep to yourself. Let's start with your personal reflection on the experiences that you've just heard. 1. What were common themes or ideas that inspired people to stand up for human rights? Which aspect of their stories resonated with you the most? 2. What inspires you to stand up for human rights and against injustice? 3. Can you assess the status of your own human rights and if you have suffered any violation? So, let's now consider what human rights are. There is not one single definition, but common to all approaches is the conviction that human rights are fundamental for us to live in dignity as human beings. Human rights guarantee the equality of all people, integrity of the person, privacy, personal freedom, and fulfillment of basic existential and social needs. They are the rights and freedoms that belong to each and every person, because we are all human beings. So, we are all entitled to these rights and freedoms, whatever our nationality, place of residence, sex, skin color, religion, and language. Would you be able to recognize how human rights relate to your daily life? Human rights issues surround us everywhere in our lives. Whether you speak your mind, freely choose your partner, or gather with friends in public. Human rights seek to ensure that we are treated fairly and equally at work, at school, and at home. Can you name some of them? Think about it for 30 seconds. Now, think about some everyday situations like going to school, receiving treatment in a hospital, sharing personal information with your employers, traveling, or even dancing and painting a picture. Some human rights are the right to privacy, the right to freedom of expression, the right to education, the rights to freedom of movement, the right to health. Can you think of other rights that are related to your life, whether at home and in school, when interacting with others in your workplace, or when sharing your thoughts online? If one of these rights is taken away, how does this affect your other rights? Write your reflection on your notebook. Here are more examples on human rights. While the principles underlying them can be traced further back in time, it was only after the atrocities of World War II that the protection of human rights emerged prominently as an urgent challenge that states committed to address at the international level. In 1948, the first international document on human rights was adopted, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, also known as UDHR. The first article states that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights was one of the first steps in giving individuals a tool in the fight against oppression, impunity, and attacks on human dignity. The UDHR includes, amongst many others, the right to life, the right to education, the right to freedom of expression, the right to adequate standard of living, including housing, food, clothing, and medical care, the right to Social Security, the prohibition of torture, the right to work, and the right to liberty. You have seen that human rights concern all aspects of our lives. Let's now consider how they are upheld across the world. Following the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, states have adopted additional international treaties and agreements that further elaborate the type of human rights to be protected, as well as their scope. Human rights include civil and political issues, economic, social, and cultural issues, racial discrimination, migrant workers, people with disabilities, children, women. Why are these documents important? Many of these documents create binding obligations for all states who have accepted them. The compliance with these obligations is monitored by international protection mechanisms. For example, the United Nations treaty bodies or regional human rights courts in the Americas, Africa, and Europe. These documents also represent an important point of reference for holding states accountable when it comes to their own human rights records. Do you know where some of the best established regional human rights systems are? Think about it for some seconds. Some of the best systems have been established by the Council of Europe, with the European Court of Human Rights, by the Organization of American States, with the Inter-American Commission and Court of Human Rights, and the African Union, with the African Court on Human and People's Rights. So what's the state's role in human rights then? Under these treaties, it is the states that are obliged to respect, protect, and fulfill these rights for all persons on their territory. Respecting our rights means to refrain from undue interference, for instance, police violence, torture, arbitrary executions or arrests. Protecting our rights means to take measures to prevent abuse of our rights by others, for instance, against domestic violence, against environmental pollution by big companies. Fulfilling our rights means to create the legal and institutional framework so our rights can be guaranteed. For instance, build schools and hospitals, adopt laws prohibiting crimes against life and property. However, not all states uphold their human rights obligations in the way they should, and our rights are not always equally guaranteed or respected in different parts of the world. Human rights are violated every day, in all corners of the world, and sometimes on a horrendous scale. But they are also protected by laws, which means that we can claim our rights before national courts, other state authorities, and even international bodies. Everyone can defend human rights. Human rights belong to everyone, and everyone can play a role in defending and promoting them. Too often, states do not guarantee our rights, even though they should. In order to uphold them, we need to claim them. And this is where you and everyone else can play an important role. Whether it is getting active in your community, raising awareness for a cause in the broader public, or urging states to live up to their human rights obligations. Would you be able to convey your message and discuss human rights with others? One of the first steps in promoting and claiming human rights is to talk about them. When discussing human rights issues with friends, colleagues, or other people, you might have felt that there are some misconceptions that you don't agree with, but don't know how to respond to. Let's explore some human rights principles, finding out how to react to statements you might have heard in previous discussions. Now, take 20 seconds to think about your argument with each statement. For instance, if I asked you who has human rights, would you answer that everybody has human rights from birth onwards, or that it depends?
I would argue that it depends, as most individuals in the Northern Hemisphere have human rights, while many people in the Southern Hemisphere don't.
For me, everybody has human rights from birth onwards.
The correct answer is that we are all born with human rights. They cannot be given, bought, earned, or inherited. This is one of the key characteristics, the principle of inheritance. However, despite everyone being entitled to them, there are many people whose human rights are not respected or protected. When states do not live up to their obligations, human rights defenders take action to claim back their rights and those of others. My following question is, are human rights universal, and do they apply to everybody?
No, I think that they are just a Western concept and represent a tool for the West to force their values upon other states.
Well, it depends on each state to decide which human rights the people on its territory should have.
Yes, all human beings everywhere in the world are entitled to the fulfillment and guarantee of all human rights.
The correct answer is that all human beings have human rights. It is the duty of all states to promote and protect them. This is one of their key characteristics, the principle of universality. The concept of human rights is based on human values that can be traced in various cultures, philosophies, and religions around the globe. Despite some differences in traditions and values, all human beings share common human needs, which are addressed by human rights. One more question. Do you think that when an individual commits a crime and is sentenced to imprisonment, they lose their human rights, especially the right to liberty?
I think that it's wrong, because even if an individual commits the most serious crimes like murder or rape, they should not be stripped of their rights. However, they will be restricted in their enjoyment of them as a consequence of their crime, so some human rights might, under certain circumstances, be limited, but they still have them.
I don't agree. I think that if an individual commits a crime, they lose their right. You cannot expect to have human rights if you abuse the rights of others.
Well, millions of people worldwide lose their human rights every day, even without having committed a crime.
What do you think? Who do you agree with? Think about it for 5 seconds. The correct answer is that human rights cannot be taken away or renounced. No one has the right to deprive another person of their rights. or to give up their rights for any reason. This is one of the key characteristics of human rights, the principle of inalienability. Most of them can, however, be limited if certain conditions are met.
What are those certain conditions?
The certain conditions are those provided by law, meaning that any restriction must be incorporated into domestic legislation, formulated with sufficient precision to enable an individual to regulate their conduct accordingly. Legitimate aim, as the measure needs to pursue a legitimate aim of protecting specified public interests, national security, public order, public health, or morals, or the rights or reputations of others. Necessary, meaning that the limitation it is the least restrictive measure to achieve the legitimate aim. And proportionate, meaning that the measure is not more harmful than the harm it is designed to protect against. And to conclude this discussion, do you think that some human rights are more important than others?
I think that all human rights have to be seen as a whole. If one right is not guaranteed, a multitude of other rights might be affected as well. For example, if the right to housing is violated and a person must sleep in the streets, the right to health, to recreation, and ultimately to work are also at stake.
I believe that human rights which protect civil and political liberties like the right to life, the right to freedom of expression, the right to fair trial, or the prohibition of torture are most important, as they guarantee that states refrain from interfering in the personal and political decisions of individuals.
I think human rights which guarantee the fulfillment of basic needs are more important. Only when, for example, the right to food, the right to water, and the right to work are protected can individuals start to consider making use of their right to freedom of expression or the right to strike.
One of the previous answers proves true again. All human beings are entitled to all human rights. The guarantee of one human right facilitates the guarantee of the others. Likewise, the deprivation of one human right often adversely affects the others. States should not be able to pick and choose which categories of human rights are guaranteed. This is one of their key characteristics: the principle of indivisibility, interdependence, and interrelatedness. Let's now talk more about the principles of human rights. Human rights are equal and non-discriminatory, interdependent, interrelated, and indivisible, universal, inherent, and inalienable. It's important to remember that these principles are their key qualities. They can also be seen as aspirations and ultimate objectives of the human rights system. Equal and non-discriminatory means that all human beings are born equal in dignity and rights. We are all equally entitled to our human rights without discrimination, whatever our nationality, place of residence, sex, national, ethnic, or social origin, skin color, religion, gender identity, or any other status. Interdependent, interrelated, and indivisible means that all human beings are entitled to all human rights. The guarantee of one human right facilitates the guarantee of the others, and the degradation of one human right often adversely affects the others. How to take action? Let's explore some ideas on how you can promote human rights in your community. When you are taking action, don't forget to research what human rights organizations around you are already working on. It might be more effective to join forces with others instead of duplicating or unintentionally undermining the efforts of existing initiatives. In all cases, make sure that your actions do not harm others in your specific context. Some of the key strengths and skills that you could use to promote human rights in your community are researching facts, engaging in discussions, taking a stance in your daily life, and educating others. The first strength is to research the facts and share your findings. Stay informed and up to date on human rights issues, and in general, follow the local, national, and international news. Pick a variety of sources to ensure you have a diversity of views and opinions. If you plan to take action for others, listen to them and find out how you can really help them. Take further trainings, workshops, or courses on human rights issues, online and/or offline. Invite friends or colleagues to take the courses with you. Discuss what you learned and why it matters. Produce a community newsletter, offering a human rights perspective on daily issues. The second most important thing you can do is starting a dialogue and engaging a discussion about human rights. Discuss current human rights challenges and issues with your friends, colleagues, and especially with people who have different opinions to yours. Challenge friends and family members who tell racist or discriminatory jokes at home. It can be difficult to speak up to the people closest to you, but nevertheless, you can explain to them how their comments make you feel and what impact they can have on others. Taking a stance in everyday life is another key thing that you can do. When you witness a verbal racist attack in the streets or in public transport, don't remain silent or passive. Try to provide comfort to the person being targeted by involving them in a dialogue. Try to ignore the attacker, yet take steps to ensure your physical safety when you find yourself in such a confronting situation. In fact, even if you ignore the attacker, you could still be putting yourself in harm by going into this dangerous situation to comfort a victim. However, your courage will be an inspiration for others to do the same. Speak up when you see that someone is not treated with dignity, whether it is for a classmate who is being bullied, a colleague that is being harassed, or a friend that is being discriminated because of who they are. Showing solidarity and courage when it is needed can make a whole lot of difference. Last but not least, you can educate others and be empathetic by supporting people in your neighborhood who are living at the edges of society. Homeless persons, asylum seekers, refugees, or people with little or no income. Visiting a local homeless or asylum center, for example, can help to break down barriers or prejudices and be a source of comfort to those being visited. This is also a valuable learning experience for yourself. Those who visit these places have lots to learn, and these experiences are often a two-way learning opportunity. Supporting kids with learning difficulties or young people from disadvantaged backgrounds, helping them to catch up with their peers and benefit as fully as possible from the education system. Helping others to thrive can be an incredibly rewarding experience. Tutor recent immigrants and refugees in your city. Help them with basic tasks such as using public transport, filling out forms to access services, finding their way through the bureaucratic maze, or prepare immigrants for citizenship examinations. So far, you have explored how the concept of human rights relates to your everyday life. You have also encountered some ideas on how to take action for human rights in your community. Take pen and paper and reflect on the following. Think for 10 seconds about what you have learned so far. Which human rights issues are of most concern to you and in your context? Congratulations! You have completed Module 1. Please continue to Module 2 to learn more about how to speak up for human rights. In this module, we explored the fundamental principles of human rights: universality, inalienability, and the principle of indivisibility, interdependence, and interrelatedness. We have seen that human rights are universal in the sense that all human beings, everywhere in the world, have them. While the significance of national, regional, and cultural particularities must be kept in mind, it is the duty of all states to promote and protect all human rights, primarily in their territory and for people under their jurisdiction. They are also inherent, as we are born with them. Human rights cannot be given, bought, earned, or inherited. Finally, they are inalienable, because they cannot be taken away, renounced, or exchanged. No one has the right to deprive another person of their rights, or to give up their rights for any reason. Welcome to Module 2 on Speaking Up for Human Rights. Let's hear what the most rewarding experiences have been when speaking up for human rights for Maria Munir, Guadalupe Marego, and Salil Shetty.
For me, the reward isn't in the awards I get nominated for or the prestigious events I get asked to speak at. Those are all honours, I think. But a rewarding experience is definitely when I came out to Obama and challenged him on transgender inclusivity. My university supervisor emailed me afterwards. She's Canadian, and she said that her family friend in Canada had seen me on TV and said, "Oh, Nicole, isn't that your student?" And Nicole turned and said, "Yes, it is." And they had a massive family conversation that hadn't really been had before about, gender, and especially for the child in question who was questioning their gender. That was really empowering for them because they were able to point on the TV and say, well, that person explained what I'm trying to say. See, they did it to a world leader, so maybe I can do it to my own family. And for me, that's rewarding because I want people to feel like they don't have to look at TV to see someone who isn't relatable. They feel like they can draw on that experience themselves.
It is also related to those people that inspire me, seeing justice happening. And again, for example, when I think of the relatives of people in Peru in the 90s, that there were lots of disappearances at the time in Peru, and I met many of the relatives of those disappeared. And when they found out the truth about their loved ones, and when those who had committed those atrocities were actually put in the dock, found guilty, and punished for that crime, and they then felt that they had received justice, that, those have been really the most rewarding moments for me.
I think probably one of the best sort of moments was in Ethiopia, and so we had two. Ethiopian government has been, arresting the entire political opposition, has been arresting civil society, harassing them for almost 10-15 years now. So it's not a new story. But at a point in time, when I got involved, we had a situation where several key civil society leaders were arrested, and we had to negotiate their release with the regime there, and I was very involved, heavily involved with that process. And in the end, they did release some key activists. And as it turns out, the two people who I was directly involved in, it wasn't just me. There were many, many forces at work. So I don't want to take, singular credit for this. But the interesting thing is that these two people who were then released through that process today are the heads of the regional work for Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International. It was really a very, very difficult process, because you can imagine the families of these individuals and the activists in the country were feeling very, very down. And I think the release of these people gave a huge amount of inspiration and courage to the rest of the community.
Let's now consider 3 case studies and the rights concerned with each of them, to find out about what's the impact when human rights are guaranteed. The first case study is that of a young girl living 10 kilometers from the closest well, who has to walk there every day to fetch water for herself and her family. This takes half a day and only provides her 6-person family with 15 liters of water. This is barely enough for drinking, cooking, and doing a little bit of washing. Furthermore, the way to the well is dangerous, as armed militia as well as wild animals are hiding in the woods. Can you tell which right is concerned in this case study? The right to water, the right to non-discrimination, the right to privacy, or the right of freedom of expression? Think about it for 10 seconds. The main right concerned is the right to an adequate standard of living, such as the right to water. When the right is guaranteed, the state makes sure a well is dug near to the village or provides a water pipe. The girl has much more time for other things now, such as going to school. The second case study is that of a female journalist who is being imprisoned for writing an article which is critical of the government. She is detained in miserable conditions and suffers from deteriorating health without access to medical care, despite suffering from diabetes. The family of the journalist loses the only income they have. Therefore, they lose their home and their children have to work instead of going to school. Can you tell which right is concerned in this case study? The right to water, the right to non-discrimination, the right to privacy, or the right of freedom of expression? Think about it for 10 seconds. The main right concerned is the freedom of expression. When the right is guaranteed, the journalist is released from prison and can continue writing articles about anything she wants. The family can stay in their home. The children can go to school. The third case study is that of a teacher who has been working in a public school for several years. One day, the principal finds out that he is gay. After a set of humiliating and intrusive interviews about his personal life, the teacher is dismissed. Can you tell which 2 rights are concerned in this case study amongst the right to water, the right to non-discrimination, the right to privacy, or the right of freedom of expression? Think about it for 10 seconds. The main rights concerned are the right to privacy and right to non-discrimination. When the teacher complains about the violation of his rights before a national court, the court finds a violation of the right to privacy and non-discrimination. When the right is realized, the teacher can continue with his occupation, regardless of his sexual orientation and without living in fear for being who he is. What is your role and the role of other key actors in human rights? There are a variety of actors whose role is essential to guarantee human rights. The states have a particular obligation to respect, protect, and fulfill human rights, and other key actors are international organizations, non-governmental organizations, and last but not least, you. Let's see in detail the role of states, international organizations, non-governmental organizations, and your role. It is primarily the states and their organs, for example, courts, lawmakers, police, public officials who have to guarantee human rights for all people on their territory. Legally, states are obligated to follow the national and international human rights standards they have accepted. It is the state's obligation to respect, protect, and fulfill. First, states have to respect human rights, which means they should not unduly interfere. An example would be the obligation of the state to refrain from torturing an individual, respecting the prohibition of torture and other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. Second, states have to protect human rights, which means they should take necessary measures to prevent or redress their abuses by private actors. For example, the state has the obligation to intervene if the physical integrity of one person is threatened by another private person. This could, for example, be a police officer actively intervening and protecting the right to physical integrity of the person attacked. Third, states have to fulfill human rights, which means they should implement general and structural measures that are needed to realize them. For example, the duty to establish a human rights compliant court system that is able to guarantee the right to a fair trial, the duty to adopt laws criminalizing theft, protecting the rights of property against abuse by private persons, or to establish an educational system that allows for the realization of the right to education. But what does the state's obligations to respect, protect, and fulfill actually mean in practical terms? The following scenario allows you to explore what the state's obligations to respect, protect, and fulfill actually mean regarding the right to food. Let's consider the example of a farmer and their family living in a remote area far from the next city. For many years, they have grown their own crops and lived from their own production. They use the lake next to their farm to water their crops, to feed their livestock, and to cook and clean their clothes. The first scenario is that of a company building an industrial plant close to a farm, next to the lake. They release dangerous chemicals into the water, which causes the crops to die and the livestock of the farmers to get sick. Which state obligation is most relevant here to see the difference it makes when the state is guaranteeing the right to food? Respect, protect, or fulfill? Think about it for 10 seconds. The state has the obligation to protect the farmer against the chemical waste of the industrial plant to ensure that their livelihoods and their food sources are not destroyed. This could mean that the state would need to adopt and implement laws that prohibit companies from dumping dangerous waste. It should also allow for the farmer to seek compensation from the company in the event that such waste is released into the environment and harms livestock and crops. Now, let's think about another situation. It was a dry summer, and the farm, as well as all other farms in this region, could not produce enough food for living. The farmer desperately needs to buy food items, but due to a lack of infrastructure between different regions, there is no food available for hundreds of kilometers. Even though farmers in other regions of the country had a good summer and plenty of produce. Which state obligation is most relevant here? Respect, protect, or fulfill? Think about it for 10 seconds. The state has the obligation to fulfill the right to food. It has the obligation to create the necessary infrastructure that allows the farmer to have access to sufficient and adequate food. In extreme cases, the state also has the obligation to provide food directly to the farmer. Let's consider a third situation. The government discovers oil close to the farm. It decides to take possession of the farm in order to be able to exploit the oil fields, without paying any compensation. This robs the farmer and their family from all sources of food and income. Which state obligation is most relevant here? Respect, protect, or fulfill? Think about it for 10 seconds. The state has the obligation to respect the right to food of the farmer and their family, as well as the right to property in this scenario, and cannot interfere in a way that destroys the livelihood of the farmer and their family. You have now discovered that it is the state who is the main actor and duty bearer when it comes to the realization of human rights. However, whether a right in reality will be guaranteed often depends on pressure from the international community, such as international organizations like the United Nations, and on the work of NGOs, that is, non-governmental organizations, and individual activists or human rights defenders. While states are the first guarantors of human rights, they are also the ones who frequently violate them. Therefore, international and regional protection mechanisms, that is, international courts or monitoring bodies, are considered essential to hold states accountable for the fulfillment of human rights obligations they have accepted. International organizations have a number of tools at their disposal to promote and enforce the implementation of internationally guaranteed human rights standards. These are monitoring and inquiring human right-related situations, collecting complaints by victims, fostering discussions on human rights, and education. The first tool is monitoring, which aims to reinforce the state's responsibility to guarantee human rights, preventing their violations in the first place. States, as well as civil society, report about human rights standards, and these reports form the basis for recommendations on how to improve their protection. The second tool is by conducting inquiries about situations of ongoing alleged human rights violations are being looked into, potentially helping to end the violations. The third tool is complaints lodged by victims of human rights violations, who can receive a remedy to the violation, such as release from detention, compensation, restitution of property. The fourth tool is fostering discussions on human rights. As international organizations also provide an arena for states and non-governmental organizations to discuss related issues and to negotiate new human rights standards. The fifth tool is fostering human rights education, which can be defined as any learning, education, training, or information efforts aimed at building a universal culture of human rights. From acquiring skills to apply them in a practical way in daily life, to developing values and reinforcing attitudes and behavior which uphold human rights, or even taking action to defend and promote them. Let's now consider the role of non-governmental organizations. NGOs are widely considered as the engines of human rights protection. They contribute to the development of the international human rights system by monitoring state activities, doing field work, and advocating for better human rights policies. They are seen as intermediaries between individuals, state authorities, and international organizations, acting as critical watchdogs and a mouthpiece for the voice of individuals and groups when it comes to the promotion of human rights. NGOs frequently monitor states' compliance with human rights standards and collect reliable information. They assist state authorities by identifying gaps in human rights protection so the state can change its laws, policies, and practices. They lobby for the development of new standards. They educate and equip people with the knowledge, skills, and attitude to claim and defend their human rights and those of others. They fight individual violations of human rights. They support victims of violations to claim their rights or provide them with psychological, medical, financial, or other support. They raise awareness and apply permanent pressure on state authorities to act according to their human rights obligations. In order to make sure that human rights are respected, protected, and fulfilled, we cannot always rely on state authorities alone. You, the rights holders, need to claim them for yourselves and for everyone. We all need to play a part in defending and promoting human rights, wherever they are threatened or violated. We have to speak up against injustice, against violence or discrimination. We have to point out if an action or inaction by state authorities is violating them. Otherwise, states can continue to violate their human rights obligations without being held accountable. Human rights are there for all of us, but they can only work if we use and claim them. We can all contribute to creating a world where all people have their rights respected and protected. Now, take pen and paper, or record yourself, to start a new activity where you can reflect on how you can act. Write your own manifesto. A manifesto is a powerful statement of belief and action. It can be a powerful reminder of your beliefs and what motivates you to stand up and campaign for human rights. Here are the core elements to include. Core value. What deeply held belief is motivating you? What human rights issue do you want to act on? What is the change you would like to see? The way forward. What will you do next? Listen to how speaking out for human rights can change lives through the stories which represent some significant achievements on individual cases that were made possible because people like you stood up for them.
Norway, John Jeanette Solstad Remo. In 2015, following an Amnesty International campaign, John Jeanette Solstad Remo, a transgender woman, was able to change her legal gender without compulsory medical treatment. I can't imagine that Parliament won't make this law now. And when the new law is in place, you will be able to choose your own legal gender, said John Jeanette Solstad Remo. In June 2016, Norway passed the new law that gives transgender people access to legal gender recognition.
Egypt, Mazen Mohamed Abdallah, freed from detention in February 2016. The 14-year-old boy had allegedly been tortured, including being raped by a security officer bent on extracting a confession. Amnesty was the first to break the story, sparking broad media coverage that embarrassed the Egyptian government and prompted them to free Mazen. There are no words that could be said to express my gratitude and thanks to Amnesty International for getting my son back to me, said Mazen's mother.
Indonesia, Falp Karma. Activist Falp Karma was finally free from prison in Indonesia in November 2015. He had been jailed for more than a decade after raising a Papuan independence flag at a political ceremony in 2004. Amnesty supporters have long campaigned for Falp's release, including 65,000 messages of support written from 80 countries during Amnesty's letter-writing marathon, Right for Rights, in 2011.
Nigeria, Moses Akatugba. On 28 May 2015, Moses Akatugba, a Nigerian death row inmate, was pardoned after nearly 10 years in jail. He had been tortured to confess to a crime he says he never committed. Over 800,000 activists have sent letters demanding justice. Amnesty International members and activists are my heroes. I want to assure them that this great effort they have shown to me will not be in vain. I promise to be a human rights activist to fight for others, said Moses.
El Salvador, Maria Teresa Rivera, freed in May 2016. The 33-year-old had been sentenced to 40 years in prison in 2011 after suffering a miscarriage and then being accused of having an abortion. Thousands of Amnesty activists around the world wrote letters on her behalf, urging El Salvador to release her and stop criminalizing abortion. I'm very grateful to every man and woman who has been following my case with lighted candle and who hoped that I would be free, she wrote later.
Let's now see some ways in which you can speak up for human rights. So far, you explored how they are connected to our everyday lives and how you can take action to promote human rights in your community. Now, you will explore how you can raise awareness on human rights on a larger scale. Here are some ways to employ your strengths and skills to promote human rights in your community. Being creative, inspiring others on social media, writing articles and letters, and organizing and facilitating public events. Expressing yourself artistically means that you can draw attention to a human rights issue through art or satire. Take it to the streets or other public places. Do guerrilla theater, spontaneous, surprise performances in unlikely public spaces, intended to raise awareness. Take part in a flash mob, reclaiming public space. Give a name or a slogan to your flash mob to get your message across. You can also use a symbol that all participants can hold up or act out at the same time to reinforce the visual impact of the performance. Make sure you record your flash mob to share it online with an even larger number of people and inspire others. Write a poem and use the power of language to stir emotions and to liberate ideas. Compose a song, paint a picture, or design a mural. There are many ways of artistic expression that can be used to advocate for human rights. You can also speak out on social media through, for instance, hashtag campaigns, which can be a powerful way to raise awareness for a human rights issue publicly. Choose a catchy, simple, and meaningful hashtag that encourages others to contribute to your campaign. Today, many politicians and influencers are active on social media. Challenging and engaging with them can be a great way to amplify voices and get them to act. If you are passionate about a particular human rights issue and regularly read about it, why not share your findings with others through a public Facebook page? You can also write a letter to the press, picking up on racist or intolerant attitudes or other human rights-related topics. Write an article for a local or national media outlet on a human rights issue that is close to your heart. Support people in raising their voices loud enough to be heard, and explore how you can support them in taking action, which might include children, elderly people, refugees, depending on the society you live in. By writing letters or articles for newspapers. Interview people from marginalized groups and write about their perspectives. Telling real stories can be an effective tool to help people empathize with others and recognize the importance of upholding human rights. To organize public events, you can initiate a photo exhibition in your community. For example, showing the impact of pollution on a neighborhood. This can open others' eyes and may help to start a movement to get the issue addressed. Initiate or organize demonstrations, flash mobs, protest marches, petitions, sit-ins, critical mass events that deal with human rights issues. These activities will raise awareness of an issue and might attract others to a cause. Joining forces makes you stronger. This also may get the media talking, shows those in power that people are watching, and helps to put pressure on decision makers. Make 10th December, which is International Human Rights Day, important in your community. Invite local human rights heroes and activists to speak. Establish a Human Rights Defenders Award for members of the community who contribute to the protection and promotion of human rights, and invite local politicians or state representatives to join the celebration. Congratulations! You have completed Module 2. Please continue to Module 3 to learn more about challenging and influencing systems. Welcome to Module 3 on Challenging and Influencing Systems. Let's now hear again from Maria Munir, and let's meet Sakris Kupila, both activists fighting for gender recognition, to know what gives them the courage to continue advocating for human rights after a setback.
I think I developed an attitude in life that made me more resilient, which was the setbacks aren't necessarily a bad thing. They're something that we can use to draw on. So for instance, recently the UK government issued guidance for employers on non-binary gender. But then at the last minute when they published that guidance, they changed to non-binary to just say undefined or non-specified. And that was a setback. But it gives us the opportunity to show people that, look, these institutions are kind of giving face value, opportunities to us and not necessarily changing their attitude. And if anything, that allows more people to unite and see, wait, hang on, it's not that easy to change institutions, and maybe we can join in. And I think that gives other people the courage to say, well, actually, it's not all about, those gold star successes and trophies. It's about the little struggles and overcoming them each time that I think gives us more power when we're doing our human rights work.
One of the hardest things in this fight for the law to change has been the feeling that you are not listened to. I got to a really low point a little bit over a year ago when I felt like I get no response, that I've been trying to tell the government and the people the same things over and over again, but they are always dismissing our pledge. They're always saying it's not a priority. They're telling lies about trans people. They are making up these scenarios. They are quoting the Bible, and they are really not thinking about the people behind this. I felt really powerless. But then after a while, I got this email from Amnesty asking, hey, would you like to grab a coffee with us? We'll have a proposal. It's about global campaigning about trans rights. That was a glimpse of hope I needed. Up to that point, I had been so done with everything. But that was the thing I grabbed onto. That was the thing that pushed me again and made me keep going, that made me realize that, there is still hope.
Let's now reflect on the first steps in identifying a human rights violation. Listen to the following statements. 1. Murder contravenes the right to life, liberty, and security of person. 2. Kidnapping disregards the right not to be subjected to arbitrary arrest and detention. 3. Assault may infringe on the right to not be subjected to cruel and degrading treatment. What do these terrible acts have in common?
They are the most serious violations of human rights.
They are not necessarily human rights violations.
They're not violations because they're not human rights.
Not everything that is unjust counts as a human rights violation. Legally, a private person who commits these acts does not commit a human rights violation, but commits a crime, for which they should be held accountable under national law before national courts. In cases where the state is culpable, either out of negligence or an active role, these acts might lead to or constitute a human rights violation. Recall from the last module, who is the main duty bearer when it comes to human rights? Think about it for 5 seconds. The state is the main duty bearer, and it is the state who has to respect, fulfill, and protect human rights. Under certain circumstances, however, a murder scenario might constitute a human rights violation. The first case is if the state fails to take appropriate steps to prevent the murder of a person. For example, if the victim had approached the police and had told them about credible threats to his or her life, and the police did not act accordingly, the state's failure to act could amount to a violation of the state's obligation to protect and/or fulfill the right to life. The second case is if the state has not adopted the necessary legal provisions to prevent such acts. In this scenario, for example, if the state has not criminalized murder in its penal code, the state's failure to act accordingly could amount to a violation of the state's obligation to fulfill. The third case is if the state has adopted the necessary legal provisions but is failing to prosecute. The state's failure to act accordingly could amount to a violation of the state's obligation to protect. The fourth case is if the killing is committed by a state organ. For example, a police officer in duty arbitrarily killing a member of the public. Now you know that you have to take a closer look at the state's role to see whether a certain scenario really is a human rights issue, or whether it's a crime or an unjust situation. But you will also need to consider the next step. Is the right concerned an absolute or relative one? Not all human rights are absolute. In fact, most of them are relative. But what does that mean? When it comes to absolute human rights, they cannot be restricted under any circumstance. Every time the state interferes with these human rights, this is qualified as a human rights violation. When it comes to relative human rights, states can restrict these rights under certain conditions. The interference must have a legal basis, must pursue a legitimate aim, and must be necessary and proportionate. If any one of these conditions is not met, the interference or limitation is qualified as a human rights violation. Let's now check which human rights are absolute and which ones are relative. For 10 seconds, think about each of the following rights and guess if they are absolute or relative. The right to freedom of conscience and to change religion. The prohibition of torture. The freedom of expression. The right to be recognized as a person before the law. The prohibition of slavery. The right to an adequate standard of living. The right to liberty. The right to life. The right to a fair trial. Here are the correct answers. The absolute rights are freedom of conscience and to change religion, the right to be recognized as a person before the law, the right to a fair trial, the prohibition of torture and the prohibition of slavery. The relative rights are freedom of expression, the right to life, the right to liberty, and the right to an adequate standard of living. So, as you can see, there are only a handful of rights that are absolute. These rights are at the very core of human dignity. Every interference with these rights is under all circumstances prohibited, as this would undermine the dignity of the person. All other rights are relative and can be limited under certain circumstances. For example, the freedom of expression, the right to liberty, the right to life, the right to an adequate standard of living, and many more. The guarantee of relative rights needs to include balancing considerations. The rights of one person can only go so far, as the rights of another person are not unduly interfered with. We are going to discover some of the positive efforts taken to protect and defend human rights around the world, and the impressive results making the world a more just and equal place. Let's see the progress in curbing torture and the efforts of human rights activists around the world to stop torture led to several countries taking progressive steps to end this practice. In Canada, following years of campaigning by Amnesty supporters, Canada finally pledged to prevent torture by committing to the optional protocol to the Convention Against Torture, OPCAT. In 2016, Guinea made torture a crime, whilst Togo strengthened its law to bring it in line with international law. In the Philippines, a historic ruling on police torture saw the first conviction under the country's 2009 anti-torture law, which followed 3 years of steadfast campaigning by Amnesty activists. Let's now see what has been done regarding the historic vote abolishes death penalty. For 40 years, Amnesty International and other organizations have been working to end executions. When Amnesty International began that work in 1977, only 16 countries had totally abolished the death penalty. Today, that number has risen to more than 2/3 of the world's countries. For instance, after a parliamentary vote in 2017, Mongolia abolished the death penalty for all crimes, after Fiji and Nauru had done the same. Finally, let's consider regional human rights protection mechanisms. A milestone in human rights in the Americas was when in 1959, the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights was established. Monitoring how the rights included in the American Convention of Human Rights and other regional instruments are implemented in 35 American states, from Argentina to Canada. It can publish reports analyzing the human rights situation in a member state, and it can deal with complaints about human rights violations, issuing non-binding recommendations to the state concerned. In San Jose, Costa Rica, in 1979, the Inter-American Court of Human Rights was established, complementing the Inter-American Commission in enforcing human rights. The jurisdiction of the court has been accepted by just 20 states, but, unlike the Commission, its decisions are binding. Both bodies have had a crucial role in developing human rights standards and policies of reparations for their violations, including monetary compensation to victims, symbolic reparations, for instance, memorials, and demands for state reforms and criminal prosecutions of individual perpetrators. In Africa, the African Commission on Human and People's Rights was established in 1987. In order to monitor the rights included in the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, it applies to 54 of the 55 African states, which means it promotes human rights for around 1.2 billion people. The Commission receives state reports on the realization of human rights, as well as complaints by states and individuals. It can issue non-binding decisions about the existence of a human rights violation. The African Court of Human and People's Rights, established in 2004, complements the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. It can deliver binding judgments on human rights violations, including the order of remedies and reparations to the victim. So far, 8 states have accepted the competence of the court to receive complaints from individuals and NGOs. In Europe, since 1959, the European Court of Human Rights has been safeguarding the human rights listed in the European Convention on Human Rights, which has been accepted as binding by 47 states, from Portugal to Russia. This means that the court monitors the respect of these rights for more than 800 million people. The court can issue binding judgments on the existence of their violation and order payment of compensation to the individual or individuals whose rights have been violated. The state must then take steps to remedy the violation. This could include changing laws and policies, releasing wrongfully convicted prisoners, or ordering a retrial in cases where a conviction followed unfair proceedings. Let's see how you can take action by challenging politicians to act for human rights. So far, you explored how you can raise awareness for a human rights issue in the general public. Now you will find ideas on how you can activate for state representatives and politicians to take action. Public speaking, investigating, and researching and convincing others are some of the things that you can do. You can organize a public debate on a human rights issue of interest and invite public officials and friends to come along, or organize a panel discussion, and invite a local politician to join the panel as a speaker or as part of the audience. You can also attend community meetings or political gatherings and take the floor when issues that concern human rights are discussed. Adding a human rights perspective to the political decision-making process is a very crucial task. You can research and share the facts, collect information in order to create a fuller picture of a certain human rights issue. You can use, for example, social networks, text messages, interviews in the streets, and talking to friends, colleagues, and family members to collect information. You can also organize a public exhibition with the results of the surveys and share the results with stakeholders and/or political representatives. Find out about the human rights obligations the state has to respect and which treaties it has signed. You may want to contact a lawyer or NGO active in the field and ask for their advice. Then write a letter to your political representatives or the local politician concerned, asking what they are doing to make sure these obligations are fulfilled. Share the outcome with the media or in other ways you have explored in Module 2. Write a letter to state representatives at home or abroad, urging them to stop a specific human rights violation, to change their policies and practices on a certain issue, or to intervene with other states who are committing violations. You can meet up with a politician. Find out who your political representatives are at local, national, and regional levels. Then, find out who is a good contact to bring forward your ideas. Find out if there are any other actors already lobbying for certain issues and possibly join forces. Contact local authorities who are responsible for a particular decision, and opposition politicians or others with influence over policy. Ask for a meeting or organize a public hearing and invite them to attend. Would you be able to assess your personal risk? It is important to be aware of the potential risks associated with taking action for human rights. Threats can be explicit and direct, for example, verbal intimidation, or they can be implicit and indirect, for example, a hostile environment. Vulnerabilities are personal. They define where or how a threat could harm someone. Capacities are sources of strength and support, which can increase security and safety. The following self-assessment questions can help guide your thoughts regarding what threats or risks you face on a regular basis. Do you regularly work or commute in an area that is unstable or dangerous? Do you work on a topic that is highly controversial in your area, or that the authorities and/or any other powerful groups would see as threatening to their interests? Do you have close family that could be targeted for retaliation? Now, let's think about what vulnerabilities you have that could make it easier to attack or harm you. Please take the time to reflect on the following questions. Do you carry sensitive information that could cause something to happen to yourself or others if it was stolen or misplaced? Do you carry a mobile phone that could be used to track your movements and/or communications? Are you well known for your work in your area, and could this increase the likeliness of attacks or harm? Finally, let's consider what strengths and capacities you have access to. Please take the time to reflect on the following questions. Do you have a working phone? And can you use it discreetly without being monitored? Do you have strong family or community ties that are supportive? Can you access adequate health care if you need it? Do you have access to legal advice and representation if you need it? Let's now consider some general tips to mitigate risks. Risk mitigation is often contextual. You will need to consider your own unique situation. However, there are some general guidelines that you can utilize to think about how to minimize your risks. The following recommendations offer an overview of how to reduce risk that may accompany taking action for human rights. When traveling, find alternate ways or times to travel to and from places you frequently visit, and vary the journey so that your movements are less predictable. Take a safer mode of transportation. For example, You can opt for a licensed or trusted taxi after a certain time at night, or travel together with friends. Regarding your surroundings, you can make your home and work environment safer. For example, by installing lights in dark corners, ensuring doors and windows have safe and secure locks, with no easy break-in points. Now, let's consider some tips related to the use of technology. First, have credit on your phone and carry a second fully charged battery or power bank with you at all times. Second, use Facebook, Twitter, and other social media carefully. Check if others can easily trace your movements using your social media accounts. Third, erase sensitive information from devices, such as phones or tablets, that could put you or your contacts at risk if traveling to a high-risk area. Fourth, ask yourself what you really know about tech security and staying safe online. Improve that knowledge or find someone who can help you improve your knowledge and capabilities. Finally, use safe passwords and change them regularly. Some tips on relationships are also important. Think about who you should let know where you are on a regular basis. Consider working with other people promoting human rights issues and travel in larger numbers. Think about who can publicly back you or can make statements supporting you that would help improve your credibility in the public eye. If you went missing, who would know? What can you do to ensure someone notices sooner? You could establish a regular check-in routine and a plan of action for what to do in case you miss a check-in. Be aware of your surroundings when having sensitive conversations. Now take pen and paper or record yourself to start a new activity where you can reflect on how you can act. Consider the following questions. How will you take action for human rights? What risks do you need to consider, and what steps will you take to mitigate risks? Let's now check your knowledge. You will listen to 10 questions. Question number 1. Select the statement that is correct.
Human rights are indivisible, interdependent, and interrelated.
Human rights concern only civil and political aspects of our lives.
All human rights treaties are legally binding for all states.
Think about it for 5 seconds. The correct answer is that human rights are indivisible, interdependent, and interrelated. Question number 2. Complete the sentence. Everyone has human rights simply because
They were granted to them by their government.
They are human beings.
They obtain these rights with their birth certificate.
Think about it for 5 seconds. Here, the correct answer is that everyone has human rights simply because they are human beings. Question number 3. Is it true or false that the right to liberty is considered to be more important than the right to education? Think about it for 5 seconds. The correct answer is false. Question number 4. Is it true or false that an adequate standard of living, including food, water, housing, and medical care, is a human right? Think about it for 5 seconds. The correct answer is true. Question number 5. What are the human rights obligations of the state?
Respect, adjudicate, and fulfill.
Respect, protect, and fulfill.
Respect, protect, and finance.
Think about it for 5 seconds. The correct answer is respect, protect, and fulfill. Question number 6. Is it true or false that a private person who murders somebody commits a human rights violation, not a crime. Think about it for 5 seconds. The correct answer is false. Question number 7. Select the correct statement.
Every time a human right is limited, we also call that a human right violation.
The majority of human rights are absolute.
Every time the state interferes with an absolute right, it is qualified as human rights violation.
Think about it for 5 seconds. The correct answer is that every time the state interferes with an absolute right, it is qualified as human rights violation. Question number 8. Is it true or false that taking action for human rights requires special education and years of experience? Think about it for 5 seconds. The correct answer is false. Question number 9. Complete the sentence. Some human rights courts can issue legally binding judgments, which means that
the state has to follow the judgment and pay compensation, change its laws and practices.
The state does not need to follow the judgment but has to apologize to the people concerned.
The state can choose whether or not to implement the judgment and will be rewarded if the judgments are implemented.
Think about it for 5 seconds. The correct answer is that the state has to follow the judgment and pay compensation, change its laws and practices. Question number 10. Is it true or false that only states play a role in the protection and promotion of human rights? Think about it for 5 seconds. The correct answer is false. We hope this course fulfilled your expectations, and you are now able to reflect on how human rights relate to your daily life. The importance of speaking up for human rights, the different roles of key actors in promoting human rights, including your own role in defending and promoting them to influence others to act. We hope that now you're also able to assess and mitigate risks when taking action for human rights. By completing this course, you have further developed your knowledge and skills to defend your rights and those of others, so that this need not be the end, but just the beginning of your journey into human rights. Let's now listen to the final message from Maria Munir, Guadalupe Marego, and Sakris Kupila.
There is much power in a community that I didn't necessarily feel when I was growing up, because it's very easy to feel isolated when you're working on an issue, especially one that isn't necessarily picked up by mainstream activists. Especially, if you feel like you're in a rural community, or you might be, young, you might feel like you don't have enough qualifications to work hard. But you know what? That's how I felt once. But I'm in a place now where I feel like I can look at other people in the community that I know and say, hang on, I can be like them. They too started from a different place. So I think the first thing you need to do is find someone who feels the same way you do. Then look at how other people make you feel and why they make you feel that way. Unpick, who is it that's got this power over me? Is it my local government? Is it my family? Is it my friends? Is it the teachers? Is it the law enforcement? And see, what is it that you possess that you feel could help change those attitudes? Because it's the attitudes that need to change before people sign the legislation and put it into power.
I would tell them, not get frustrated. This, join organizations perhaps like Amnesty or others. Take it personally and do something about it, because at the end you do get there. Sometimes it takes long. Like, for example, people might remember that it took 30 years for the cases, the grave human rights violations that a dictator like Pinochet had committed to come to the light and to get people into prison. and have justice for those people. But so sometimes it takes a long time. But I mean, if we persist, we get there in the end.
What I would like to tell is that this is a long process. You cannot change the world at once. You cannot change the world in a lifetime probably, but you can start the change. You can be a part of the change. You can make it better for, you know, my siblings. You can make it better for your siblings. You can make it better for your kids. You can make it better for even the people around you. Anyone really. And you can't do it alone, and you don't have to do it alone. Because the power is in the people. The power is in numbers. The power is in the whole mindset of the whole society. And you are contributing to that by speaking up. And that's the most important thing you can do. And apart from that, just be yourself. Just wake up in the morning. Go on with your life. Just exist. Because there are no human rights without human beings. There is no movement without normal, regular people. There aren't any activists without people like me who just become active. You just need to be you and to be human and to have compassion and to be a little bit brave.